Okay, so we have quality monitoring at the as the last one for
Yeah,
the roles
yeah,
and
and again,
functions.
I'm sure someone could sit and say, "Oh, you need to add this, this, and this." But I think this is a good foundation for, just to kind of get things started. But definitely
Yeah,
quality is having some type of quality control person who understands it. It could be part of the data science team who's can sit down and maybe they do k-means clustering. Maybe they do some other statistical analysis to understand what's the upper level, the lower level of our error rate. I mean, this is all these kind of things that can go into this, but having a quality component and having a person or persons that are responsible for monitoring quality ensures that the algorithm of the program has much more of a potential for success. Again, I'll reiterate, machine learning programs right now have an 87% failure rate. And that's just like a year or 2 years ago that metric still holds. Might see that tighten down as we get more programs and more education out here, but it's a very high error rate. We've had instances already in healthcare that algorithms have failed and they've made companies look bad. So you can go on the news and look these things up. These are happening every day. It's very interesting and at the same time alarming. But the quality component's there to say, well, what are we trying to do? And what have we done? And what is the outcome of the program? Does it make sense? Again, in healthcare, we can't have a black box. We can't say, well, the
no,
authorization denied. I don't know why, but it worked. That's not an acceptable
no,
answer. And
no.
from a quality perspective, they should be putting their foot down and saying, wait a minute, we have to explain this and we have to be transparent. I can't understand the decision tree logic that got us here. So how do we need to go through and understand how this outcome occurred? Because we may have to defend this to a provider. We may have to defend this to a member to say, this is why your auth was denied, or this is why this claim is classified as a readmission. That type of stuff is going to happen. And so if we don't have a good quality component to one, monitor that the output is correct, that will lead to a successful outcome of the business problem and the solution that we're getting to, we're going to hurt ourselves. And we've seen that already. I think people, again, are in such a rush to get this stuff out to kind of pat themselves on the back and say, hey, we're an AI system now, we're an AI organization, that they don't stop to think, but wait a minute, is this doing what we thought? Is it doing it the right way? And can I explain it? And quality is that good gatekeeper to prior to any launch, prior to any proof of concept, can say, wait a minute, I'm not understanding this and it's not making sense.
Yeah, and defending it with patients, defending it with providers. How about defending it with the your clients, especially
Oh
if
yeah,
it's like
for sure.
if
Yeah.
it's a state, right? State regulatory and things
Oh,
like that. But
absolutely.
honestly, the quality and monitoring function, and there are roles under these functions. We have them today. Yes, we have them today. But what we want to
Yeah.
reiterate in this area is the understanding of how your algorithms are making decisions and then
Yeah.
being able to monitor them frequently. So then when you start to pull out sampling, I will say this, there are a lot of apps out there, platforms of governance today, like quality governance. I can name you some, but I'm not going to. But um, there are solutions that you can embed with your technology that can auto monitor, like it can actually do the quality and monitoring already. However, as a company, as a leader, you need to be able to have access to interpreting that monitoring. So a person still needs to be able to explain how it's working. Is it functioning the right way? So this it's a level of checks and balances, right? It's not like AI is taking over the entire function. It's more like how can you have AI human collaboration effectively, right? That brings us to the
Yeah.
next point here. As far as what leaders need to know in implementing AI responsibly and ethically in your organization, especially for healthcare. Are your people ready, right? Are your people ready? Do they have the knowledge
Yeah.
and competency, um, even just fundamentals of AI? Do they understand it? Because the key thing for any technology, I worked in transformation. We've implemented so many transformation initiatives, digital transformation, you name it. Any anything that you're transforming, especially, implementing new technologies, you have to have adoption. Otherwise, if they don't adopt your idea, they don't adopt you don't have people buying into to the change. Um, that's a disaster waiting to happen. Honestly, it could
Yeah.
be they don't use
Yeah.
it, you don't get the ROI that you've set, or you don't even get your business, you know, the business goal for that transformation achieved because we didn't do the change management correctly, right? We didn't pay attention to change management. We didn't pay attention to the people. We didn't pay attention to getting the people ready for this change, right?
Right.
So
Right.
adoption and, having the knowledge and competency in your people. So I will say this is something that, as a leader, something you can think about investing in your people to get them ready. Um, because sometimes we've seen many times, reactive is most common response
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
anything. But let's think proactive so you don't kind of struggle later on. Um,
And
okay.
you're thinking it through too. I mean, there's so many courses out there that are free. Now,
Yeah.
granted, they're not going to teach you every aspect of AI. You
No.
For some of your domain experts, yes, you may have to pay more for them to maybe go to a college course or maybe for them to take something online or get a certificate. That's absolutely true. But to ready your organization, there's plenty of free resources out there that you can have folks go and take and celebrate them. Say, look who got the certificate. That's awesome. We're getting them a lunch or we're giving them a special kudos for this. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to get people excited about this. You don't have to pay, a fortune in training. Granted, there are some roles that may have to have an investment. If you want it to work well, you're going to make that investment. But I don't want everyone to think that, oh my God, I've got to revamp my training department for
Mm.
AI. You don't. There's
No,
so many free resources
there
out there.
are.
We've taken them, and I
Yes.
continue to take them.
Yeah,
It's
I
amazing how much
have.
stuff is out there. So
I
just
have.
again, it connect with us. We can connect you to the resources, but there's a lot
Mhm.
of stuff out there that you can take for free.
Yeah. The other thing I will recommend, as an organization, you already have partners, technology partners that, that might have something that you can access, right? But like I said, Tom said, we've done a lot of the free stuff. Some of the things that I've used techniques in building up my team, especially in the domain that we live in, you have to kind of be agile about like learning because everything is changing. We do lunch and learn. So whatever the people learned on their,
Yes.
in their own time, or they spend, they let's just say they did AI fundamentals from whatever, they come to lunch and learn. They share the things that they learned. So then you're kind of sharing the knowledge as a community of practice. So that's one area, as an example of how you can really nurture some of the learning. But learning is key, and really
Yeah.
building up your competency is key. Okay.
So give
Um,
people the time. Give people the time. This is just give people the time to get ready.
yeah. Okay, so there's another pillar that we want to talk through. Um, there's part of part of what leaders need to know on how to implement AI ethically and responsibly in healthcare analytics is taking a look at your mission and objectives, right? There's certain things that is already in your current organizational mission and objectives, reviewing all of that and making sure that AI is actually, the right solution. So, Tom, do you want to kind of talk about this segment?
Yeah, sure. So, it's funny when I was in I'm in my consulting days now, but my first job being a consultant, a person who mentored me at the time said, don't be a hammer looking for a nail. You really want to try to find the solution that's going to work and don't try to create something that's a solution. And then you go around finding, well, hey, how can I implement this? And you don't want AI to be that for you. AI could be the absolute thing that takes your business to the next level. It could shore up the gap between, a needs assessment and then AI is really the solution, or it helps you predict your business or patient outcomes. And great, that's exactly what you needed. Perfect. I would argue, look around your organization and say, what do I have now that might meet that need? And if AI is there, great. If you need to go and get AI, then go get it. But at the same time, is AI really the right solution? I know that sounds kind of silly. Like, well, wait, Tom, you're on a podcast talking about AI and using AI, and you're discouraging me from using it. I'm discouraging you from just running to AI is the correct answer. It may not be the correct answer. So first thing you need to ask yourself is, can my business problem be solved by any other means? AI is tough. AI is difficult. There is no break glass, pull down manual, and implement on day one. This is a multi-step approach that involves time and commitment. It may not be the right solution, but if it is, and you've exhausted all your efforts, that's a better business case for an executive sponsor or any sponsor to go forth and say, look, here's my business problem, and I have used this, this, and this to try to accomplish it. And here's the pros and here's the cons. And unfortunately, the cons outweigh any of the benefit.
Mhm.
Our next solution is an AI model. That way, your C-suite can look at that and say, "Wow, you really thought it through." So I would just caution you on that.
Yeah, and sometimes the decisions comes from top down, right? And like from the C-suite per se. And a lot of times the decisions are made because you want to be in you want to have a competitive advantage in your market. You want to be leading in the space. This is kind of like a buzzword. You want to be leading in the space of innovative solutions, whatever that looks like. However, it's not enough to just say I'm leading in the space because I'm doing AI. No, we can actually fail at scale. And I have a case study that I was researching as part of our training where there's a company who went bankrupt in 45 minutes because of just
Wow.
a little switch. And partly we there's it's a different scenario, but it's easily analogy to say, okay, we can make like risky decisions, but what is the outcome? What is the probability of the risk, right? And
Yeah.
as an industry leader, especially in your organization leader, um, AI could be a solution, but it may not be. Or maybe it is for some areas, maybe it's not. We just have to kind of think about, yes, strategically you want to design, where your company wants to, you're to go. So that's why we say align it with your mission and objectives, but do it in a sense
Hmm.
that you're doing it smartly, assessing your risk, understanding your business, and understanding AI and the solutions that it can provide you, but then have some guardrails to monitor it so that you can see when the risks, because risk will happen, stuff will happen. it just
Absolutely, they
it's
will.
just
Yeah.
necessary. It's the natural order of things.
Unforeseen issues will always come up.
It will
Yeah.
come up, but when it does come up, you've already kind of thought about it and there's already a plan for it, and you're well prepared, honestly. um and the most horrible thing that I've seen that is a case study is that case study where they went bankrupt in 45 minutes. It wasn't even like it was just a feature switch that got you know oversight and things like that, but it was a cultural practice. The
Wow.
lesson there was it's the cultural practice. They got complacent. And it was too late to reverse it. And it was a stock kind of
Mm.
company. It's a trading company, which is why it was it was a trading company. But still, it's it's a lesson to be learned. There's so many case studies that I will say we can all learn from. And so the other key area here on the mission and objective is, being as a leader, yes, you want to align the solution to your mission and objectives, but also get yourself educated. Really, there's some case studies out there. There's some information out there that might be helpful to helping you make better
Yeah.
decisions, right?
Yeah.
We just have to
And
look.
yeah, and the other thing I would say too is that, right now AI is like an itch for some people. It's cool, it's unique, it's sexy, it's like you said, it's a buzzword to talk
Yeah,
about. But AI is like an itch. There's a lot of vendors out there that will help you scratch it.
yes.
So you've got to be
Hmm.
very, very careful. And again, just what you said, educate yourself, know the questions to ask. If
Hmm.
bringing in a vendor you feel is the right way, perfect. What questions do you need to ask? We're going to cover that in a future, obviously a future
Yeah,
podcast, but
we have.
you know, do do we know what this vendor can do and their capabilities?
Hmm.
You know, you may not, so you got to be very careful. There's a lot of vendors out there that are selling AI. It's not really AI. So just again, just be cautious, but we'll cover that in a future podcast.
Yeah, and we also would have deeper dives of like some of the framework that we have,
Yeah.
AI Sentinel's framework on AI governance and ethics. There's, literature that we produce to, if you want to go deep dive into this topic and understand it better, we can help with that. And it'll be part of our subsequent like episodes. So stay tuned to and learn more. Okay, so the next
Yeah.
topic, especially in healthcare analytics, implementing AI ethically and responsibly, of what leaders need to know is regulatory and ethics. Okay, let's just say this out loud. AI is sexy for most things because this is kind of like the new thing, but AI governance seems like it's always like a it's not. I don't understand it, but it should be, right? Ethics and
We're the
regulatory
duds
should
in the
be.
room. I think while
We're,
everybody's on the whiteboard and getting excited and jumping up and down, look what it just did. We're the ones going, "Hey, wait a minute, I can't explain it. Is this ethical?" That I think we're the buzzkills, and let's just say it, we're the
and
buzzkills in the
I
room.
don't, but I don't. I think the perception needs to change though, because I think it's
Yeah,
the way I see ethics and regulatory and
it's
guardrails
fascinating.
and governance is it allows you to have a safe place to play. So if you think about it as a playground, especially in software development, I live in technology software development. That's kind of like
Okay.
my
Yep.
industry. In software development, especially when you're doing R&D, you can go like, where's your boundary, right? Where's your boundary? You can go off the
Yeah.
rail and fall off a cliff and there's no point of
Yeah.
return. Or governance is that fence, and it tells you where you can play safely, right? So I think a perception, I don't like to say that AI governance is not sexy. I always say that it is sexy because it needs to be.
It needs to be. It needs to
Yeah.
be. That's for sure.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so we've got
Yeah.
ethical frameworks you want to talk about, Tom?
Yes, I don't want, we can go through this later, and I don't want to talk all through this now. I think if we sit down and I start talking about virtue-based ethics or duty-based ethics or existentialism or Immanuel Kant, let's go into beneficence with Adam Smith. I can see people now exiting out of the podcast immediately, and I get that because it's a very intense subject, and
Yeah.
and there's a lot of ethical frameworks, and we focused on 8 primary frameworks. We'll release more information on this, with our materials. But in any case, one of the things that we found that are really kind of run the spectrum across all of these ethical frameworks, and we'll talk about each one of these, is one, respect for human dignity. I think that just runs a spectrum of a lot of different items. Not only is it the user and the end user, but it's also, what's the outcome of this? And in our case, we're talking about patients. If we're running an algorithm that is going to reduce readmission rates. Okay, fine. But at the end of the day, this patient has had to come back to the ER or come back to their inpatient admission, to have another issue. And the hospital clearly did a poor job of taking care of this member. So now what? What are we doing with this to not just deny the claim, but what are we doing also to take it one step further and maybe interact with this patient to find out what's going on? From the end user's perspective, it's respecting their right and their work and their own sense of ethics to build this logic and build this algorithm. So respect for human dignity just adds, such a again, you hate to say it, but such a human element to AI that demonstrates why we don't want just this fully autonomous. We've got to have human agents here that are interacting with this, and that at the same time are infusing this with ethics of care, understanding that in a healthcare environment, the patient is the center of what we're trying to
Yeah.
do. The
Yeah.
member is the center of what we're trying to
Yeah.
do. Is our algorithm respecting that?
Right. No, that's true. And as a leader making decisions, especially, what leaders need to know, um, you don't have to know all of the nitty-gritty details of all of these ethical
No.
frameworks, but you need to at least have some fundamental understanding of what the common threads of the ethical frameworks, and especially in healthcare we need to start to think about human-centered design, human-centered algorithms, right? So it's a AI human collaboration, not just let AI loose
Absolutely.
and become my employee forever. It doesn't work that way. You have to
Right.
have some guardrails around it. It's too risky, especially with patients, because there's so many things like biases and
Well,
and
let's talk about that
harm.
because I mean yeah, because I mean the consideration of consequences. I mean that's the other
Yeah,
thing you have to think about here is that, and a person told me this many years ago. They said, at the end of the day, if it was your mother or your father or your grandfather, your grandmother
yeah.
that was the other end of that account or claim, would you still take the same action? It's a fair question because there is a person at the end of this. Now, the thing with healthcare analytics, with Medicon and payment integrity, we all kind of sit in the back and we don't really interact with patients that often. Very rarely do we. So it's easier for us to hide in the data and not really see a member's face at the end of this. But that's not accurate. The members are really being impacted by what we do. So we have to think about what are these consequences of this algorithm. If it increases denial rates for authorizations, or if it's increasing denial rates for readmission, is there going to be a member impact, and what is that going to be? Well, we need to think about how do we educate our member population? How do we educate the providers? How do we educate the call center,
Right.
appeals and disputes? So this goes to show where this is touching all different avenues. We don't do this in a vacuum, but we really
Hmm.
need to think about what could the consequences of this be?
Yeah, and it's a lot of times in the technology space, we get so into our daily work, and so into more of like our projects, and the technology to implement, and all the bells and whistles, but we forget we are in healthcare actually. So healthcare, patient is our business, right? Patient care is our business. So we need to start to think about the correlation of how we connect the dots with the technology we build alongside how it impacts our business, right? um
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so then there's
And then
fairness,
the
equity, and transparency and accountability.
Yep. So fairness and equity, you were talking about, bias in the data. And again, there was an article that was yesterday that shows there's discrimination in healthcare. And again, a white patient and a patient of color in some cases are treated differently. Well, if our operation is again being discriminatory, our data is going to be discriminatory, our algorithms going to be discriminatory. So from a bias perspective, do we have every element in here articulated and identified to make sure that the outcomes, that the algorithm is fair, that it's equitable, that there's no bias in this? And it's easy to say, and we have to focus on that a lot more, and we will in upcoming presentations and upcoming material. But bias is such an element to be aware of, to continually question, is this a biased decision? And if so, why? Why do we have more white patients being delivered to this facility, but we have more patients of color going to this facility? Why are more patients of color, their authorizations being denied, but a white patient is not being? That's a real problem. Or men and women for that case.
Mhm.
It runs a spectrum, and you really have to think about that. And that goes to the next major point, is transparency and accountability. For transparency, when we talked about a black box, you can't just say, well, I don't know how it worked. Now, in some industries, that's okay. But in this case, it's not. We need to understand what happened. Why did that outcome happen positively or negatively for the patient? We have to have transparency in the model and accountability. Who's accountable for that decision? Again, this is not about berating someone for a mistake. We made a mistake. Let's find out what happened. But more importantly, who's the subject matter expert? Who's the data subject expert that can say, this is what happened and why? Who's accountable if something goes wrong? Once we have those guardrails and we have those policies to know, hey, this is an ethical bias decision has been made. We understand why, who's accountable to help fix it and identify why this happened, and how we root cause and mitigate it from happening ever again. those are really two main points here that we just can't stress enough.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to point out as a leader making decisions, there are different levels of biases, right? There's algorithm bias, which means in your data set, it's just more data from a specific demographic than the other, right? So that's there are some, data biases. Algorithm bias could be, you know, the how it's designed. It's basically learned. It's basically because the data is biased, the algorithm learned only a specific demographic, and so then it created a preference, and that's become a bias thing. But
Yep.
then there's also bias transference. This is one of those things that I was doing research on, and I wrote about on my PhD paper. That there are such a thing as bias transference. So we live in a diverse culture. We live in a global society. You've got diverse people. Um, all of our employees have different backgrounds of where they live. Some of those concepts that when they start to build something and they apply in their work transfers into the technology they build. So the key here is understanding the different level of biases. And now there are identified biases, kind of like we have 8 ethical frameworks. There are several different types of biases that we are aware of today. And we use them in, like, research and things like that. We'll publish all of this in our in the subsequent
Yeah.
episodes, but we'll publish all of this in some of our contents. But just one of the takeaway here is understanding what they are, being aware of what they are will help you
Yeah.
really mitigate. I don't think you can completely like 100% eliminate biases. I don't think that's possible. However, if you are aware of the types of biases that are out there and what they are and how to mitigate them, then you can eliminate most of it, right? You can still try to address most of it, especially when you're designing it for human, patient care, for example, right? And that's kind of the things that we don't really want to cause more harm towards. Um, that brings us to human agency and autonomy. You know, people
Yeah.
still need to be involved in these technology implementation. There needs to be a collaboration between your technology and your AI and human collaboration. There has to be some level of monitoring because AI is being trained by a human and a human is relying on AI. So there needs to be an understanding and involvement of how to do the quality and the monitoring and checks and balances.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
mean, human agency again. We reiterated that so much, but yeah, humans have to be involved to monitor. Otherwise, it puts us in a very bad situation.
So we have a couple more. I think we're running out of time, Tom, with our podcast time here.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
but I want to cover improve and learn as part of the pillar.
Okay.
And then I want to
Yep.
say we do have a case study of a hypothetical AI, ethical dilemma that we're going to be talking about. And
We
we
can always
probably
pose a question at the end, and
yeah,
we can
we can
talk about
post.
it in follow up. You know.
Yeah, we can post it at the end, or you can catch it on the membership portal. We'll put some of the case study deep dives on our membership portal. So, you know, sign up for it, and so you can get more content in our membership portal. But let's cover the other pillar of
Okay.
what leaders need to know when making decisions and implementing AI ethically and responsibly in healthcare analytics. And this pillar is called improve and learn.
You know, it's key for an organization to be a learning organization. I know people have said that for years. Are we a learning organization? But you really need to be a learning for a lot of different reasons. One, internally, are you listening to feedback? Are you listening to lessons learned? I get so irritated when we roll off projects and we don't really regroup to say what went well and what didn't. For AI, it is
Retrospective.
essential.
Yes.
You have to have them. I just don't understand why that's not just part of the discipline, or just a step at least. I mean, I've even asked, just please, just give me 30 minutes to say, let's talk about what went well, what didn't, and it's okay. We'll get better and better. Let's have a thick skin about this stuff. But companies need to think about how do you ingest feedback from your internal teams on what's going well, your end users, your users that are building the application, what went well, what didn't? Hey, the data scientists didn't have enough training. Hey, the domain experts were correct. Or hey, man, the domain experts you guys hired were absolutely on point. They were just great. The quality person we have, man, she just identified every slippery slope we were going down. Just incredible person to work with, and these created a good playbook for us for future rollouts. Excellent. If we're dealing with feedback from our customers and our patient care, hey, I can't stand having to do this automated procedure, or our providers telling us, hey, at first I wasn't sure, but you know what? I see what you're doing with authorizations now, and this makes it much more seamless. This is a lot better process for us to interact with you. You have to get that feedback, whether it's focus groups, whether it's surveys, whether it's just direct questions on some of your top providers or some of your critical care members, just to really see what's going on out there. And did AI improve the outcomes, or did it harm the outcomes? If so, why? But you have to be ready to say, you know what? We didn't get it. Or guess what? We did a really great job, but we could have done this better. And that's okay. It's not a problem.
Yeah, the other thing, so, as part of, our being readiness, right? Identifying the KPIs you're going to measure, that's part of the readiness. But then in the improve and learn, aligning those KPIs into the outcomes, and then learning from them. Here's the other thing that I want to point out, because this is in my domain realm, right? Like, when we're doing agile implementation, we have to have retrospective, and part of and, if you're doing like implementing a DMAIC process, like, Six Sigma,
Yeah.
whatever, you have
Yeah.
to have improve and control, right? That's
Yes.
monitoring control. But it's one thing to have a retrospective, great. You have I've done this, and if this has happened, everybody in the room, great feedback, we've documented everything, but it stops there. You have documentation, but no action afterwards. That
Nobody does
is,
anything with it.
it doesn't do anything. You have to have owners. Here's my recommendation, especially being, I've worked in program management. I was a transformation project and program manager, director. Um, you have to have ownership in those actions. Once you've identified some of the key areas to improve, they need to have ownership. Otherwise, it's not going to get done. And you're going to be repeating the same issue over in the next project, or it's going to be a cycle. I call it the cycle of insanity, right? It's if you're doing the same thing expecting a different result, that is insane. That's insanity. We don't want to do
Yep.
that, right? We want to continuously
Yep.
improve. And sometimes you've already improved enough to a point that, okay, that's okay. We don't need to change anything. It's fine the way it is. um and just move forward. There's other things to improve. We could always improve, but sometimes, depending on the limitation of your business, there might be, hey, this improvement is good enough. You don't need to go further,
Well,
because it could harm some things sometimes.
yeah.
But the
Yeah.
point is having to do the exercise of retrospectives and lessons learned, but having action afterwards, and ownership, and actually doing the changes.
And like you said, I mean, part of the monitor process falls into this for KPIs, because your business problem should have, at the end of the day, I want, a reduction in readmission, or excuse me, an improvement in readmission denials by 20%. And I want to see, a drop of 5% in provider phone calls, and a 50% reduction in repayment rates related to these readmissions. If you've got those clear KPIs, and that's up to the business owner, having clear measurable KPIs to monitor, to understand, did we hit our outcome? If not, how do we improve it? Maybe we only hit 15%, maybe our repayment was 30%. Okay, well, you got something and that's good, but we didn't hit where we wanted to hit. Why or why not? And then that's backing into, with feedback, and backing into the program to, where did this break down? Who's accountable that can help us tighten this up? What happened here? But it's being brave enough to answer those questions, and brave enough to ask those questions, and brave enough to take in the feedback, to say what went right, what went wrong. But to your point, having those KPIs, not only for the output of the algorithm, but output of what, of the outcome of what you're trying to achieve, is absolutely essential here. So if you don't have a clear pathway for your business objectives on what's successful, what's the point?
Yeah, yeah. And we use KPI as an example, but there's so many different metrics. Just
Sure, of
don't limit
course.
it to just we use that as an example because it's an easy, it's easy example. But I will say whatever metric is relevant for what you're trying to do, is what you need to start to measure. But you should
Yeah.
have some level of measurement to assess whether or not it's successful or it's doing what it's doing. Otherwise, how do you know that you've succeeded? We don't
Yeah.
have a gauge.
Yeah. You can't celebrate anything. Yeah. You can't
Right,
celebrate or go back and rebuild. So
right.
yeah.
So this for today, this is this is all we have, and thank you all for listening. We've what we talked about is what leaders need to know to implement AI ethically and responsibly, especially in healthcare and healthcare analytics. We will have more episodes coming up. We will have some guests, authors, and just
Very
key.
excited. Very
Yes, we are
excited.
so excited. We've got some guests coming up that are leaders in the space of AI governance and and other other things that we're going to be sharing with you all to help you really educate and be aware and really empower you to make to in this journey the AI journey in healthcare analytics. So thank you all. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Goodbye.